The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I hope everyone is having a great start to their week and today, their Tuesday. It's very hot out there if you're in Michigan, so if you can, once this is over, try to get out there and get some sun. Before we get started, I just have a couple things to go over. As you can see, we have in the handout section, we have this entire PowerPoint in a PDF version, so you can go ahead and click on that and grab that whenever you'd like. As far as questions, we will be kind of stopping and taking questions here and there throughout the presentation. Claudia will be asking some questions and we'll be hoping to get your guys' input throughout. Now, obviously, as I just said, our instructor today will be Claudia Blumenstock. She is the founder and CEO of Copernicus, and it is a nationally recognized she is a nationally recognized presenter and consultant with over 30 years of experience in long-term care. She is a licensed nursing home administrator in New York State and practiced for 15 years in that role. She then worked as a vice president for a senior housing development company where she focused on creating university-affiliated programs and services with active adult communities. Currently, Claudia works with Copernicus, focuses on providing a more engaging aging environment for older adults and a more satisfying atmosphere for staff by improving customer satisfaction and enhancing the living and working experience. Other than that, I think that takes care of everything that I will need to say. So now I'll turn it over to Claudia. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Given everything that's going on, you taking the time out of your schedules to join us, can't tell you how much we appreciate it. My partner, Ellen Bartholdis, is on listening in today. So just to let you know, we're both here and we both want to welcome you. Most importantly, we want to thank you. With all of what's happening to you in your facilities and all of the bad media and the way that people feel about nursing homes right now, it's very hard sometimes to feel good about what we do. But as a licensed nursing home administrator, I can relate, Ellen can too, to the stress that you are going through as a leader in any organization. And we appreciate how much you've done to take care of your residents, your staff, your families. This has been an awful, difficult time, and we are so grateful to you for everything that you have done. So we wanted to take a moment and say to you, thank you, because I think that doesn't happen very often. So today, we're going to give you the opportunity to share your experiences during the COVID crisis. We're going to give you the opportunity to hear your colleagues share the same. We would ask you, please, this is very interactive. Actually, I'll be honest and say that Laura Fuller came to me and said, look, our folks are really struggling through this, like we are in New York, like we are all over the country, and to give us an opportunity to talk about how we have felt through this, how you have felt through this. We really want you to open up and share. That can be hard, but it's part of the healing process for you and your staff. Some of you have had many deaths in your facilities, both of residents and staff, and we are just so sorry. And we want to give you this opportunity to share how you've been feeling. So in sharing how you're feeling, it also helps us to move forward in how we manage crisis, how we'll manage this if it hits again, as they say it will. So please share. The way to do that is to raise your hand through the platform, and then Blake will unmute you. If you wouldn't mind saying who you are, and then sharing an answer to what we're asking, that would be great. Or you certainly can write it in the chat, and again, Blake will read that, and he'll also read your name so that we know who you are. We want to make sure that we know you, because that's part of sharing when you're going through something difficult. So I'm going to be asking you several questions. They're reflective. And if you're willing to tell us about your experiences and those of your staff, it will be important in order to manage the crisis. It's grief, and we need to manage that grief. We need to talk about the grief. So we're going to ask you, if you would share with us, we'd certainly appreciate that. So our first question. It's lonely at the top, right? It's hard to be the person in charge. So what we'd love to know from you is, what haven't you been able to share? And I'm going to keep talking until Blake, please interrupt me and tell me if there's someone there that's ready to share. I want to say to you that it's hard to say how you feel. We're not used to doing that in long-term care, saying how we feel as leaders. We're used to putting our nose to the grindstone and just doing what we have to do. And while I haven't been through this crisis, some of you know that I have been through a crisis as a long-term care administrator. Many years ago, I was the administrator of a facility here in upstate New York where a resident was raped and she became pregnant. So as you can imagine, it garnered lots of attention from the Department of Health and from the Deputy Attorney General's office and from the media for a long time. And what I couldn't share during that time was how sad I was, how frustrated I was. I also had had a premature baby 5 weeks earlier. He was 10 weeks early. So I was managing my child and another child and the rape. And so I wanted to tell everybody to get out of my building so we could do our jobs, because that was where we were so stuck. There were so many people in the building all the time. Again, regulators, a hospital was trying to buy us, so they were there, consultants were there, the police were there, that we couldn't do our jobs effectively because we were tripping over these people all the time. And not that it was discovered who raped the resident, but it was so difficult to do what we needed to do for our residents because everyone was always there and questioning people and taking over spaces, and it was very hard. So I wanted to tell everybody to get out of my building so we could do our job. And I'm wondering if you have something that you'd like to share about what's been happening to you. Blake, any hands raised?
There is not anything right now. I don't have any questions or hand raised right now. If anybody would like to share anything, there is just a little button. I believe it should just look like a hand, and you can go ahead and just click on that. Or if you can't find that, where you see the questions at, you can just type in there, "I'd like to say something," and I can go ahead and unmute you.
And you can, if you don't want to say it out loud and you'd rather just put it in the chat, that would be great. But in order to help your staffs and yourselves reconnect as organizations, and some of you may already be doing this and doing a great job with that, in order to help, because this is what it was indicated to me that you were looking for, is ways to reconnect and get through some of that grief. But we're going to have to talk about it, and that's hard. It becomes embarrassing, uncomfortable. But if you start to share that, then we have the opportunity to work through it, and so does your staff. How do I encourage you to talk? One person. Ellen, do you want to hop on, and is there something you'd like to share here? Ellen and I have also been doing some work with facilities in New York, and we're seeing.
I'll go ahead and unmute Ellen right now.
Great. Yep.
Yeah, I think the facilities that I've been working with have expressed just incredible sadness and incredible anger, because people have made judgments about how administrators and facilities have operated, truly without understanding the incredible burden, the incredible sadness. So the hospital folks, deservedly so, have been honored as heroes and the saviors in this whole process. What people fail to understand is that when we lose a resident, that resident has belonged to us for a couple of years. We have relationships with these people. So I think it's hard to talk about grief. I think it's hard to talk about sadness, but the folks at the facilities that I'm working with have cried a lot, and really have tried to share it. And somehow I know when I'm able to do that, it lifts the burden a little bit. So I encourage you, if you're willing, to let us know how you're feeling. And especially for administrators, because we don't get to talk about what we're experiencing. We protect our staff, but this is a safe place today to talk about what your experience is.
All right, I do have one person. Michelle Buddha said, how do I deal with staff who are dealing with children that are dealing with this and trying to cope?
Let me just make sure I understand the question. You have staff that have children, helping the staff help the children cope, helping the staff cope with what they're feeling because they take it home to their kids. I'm just trying to understand exactly what you're asking me, Michelle.
She said helping staff deal with their children and not bringing home to work.
Oh, boy. I think that the more staff has a place to talk about it at work, they're more likely to feel some comfort in that and not bring it home. There's no guarantees that they're not going to bring it home, but this is part of what I think is what we think is so necessary right now, giving staff a place to talk about this. If you want to bring someone in from the outside, a therapist, if you want to have some people get together like we're doing here and talk about how they're feeling, if they want to talk one-on-one with you, sometimes it's just about listening to what a staff member is feeling. But any of those ways of helping staff work through this are really imperative. Does that help, Michelle?
She said yes. Thank you.
Great. I think it's going to be very important that we develop almost, and we'll send you something after the session that helps in this emotional reopening of how we bring together staff to deal with the issues. One of the things about grieving is remembering. So the ability to remember someone, remember a resident, to talk about that resident, to have a memorial board, things that are going to help in the grieving process. If you think about when someone close to you passes away and what you go through as a result of that, this is larger, so much larger. Not that individual death isn't that way, but if you think about some of the numbers of deaths that some of the facilities have had, we know that in New York, some of our facilities have had 50 to 60 deaths, and that may very well be true in Michigan too. It's just so much. So being able to give a place to share about that is going to be very important, both what they're going through from a grief perspective and the remembering place. Anybody else, Blake?
Yes, they just said, thank you for sharing your story with everything going on. Oh, I'm sorry. This is also, her name is Janice. So Janice said, thank you for sharing your story with everything going on. I usually multitask during the webinars and your story stopped me in my tracks. This does suck and we are so ready for normal. It is difficult for me not to know all the answers. Staff and families look to administrators for answers. And at this point, we are in a waiting game and I don't have all the answers.
Isn't that the worst? That's just the worst, when the one person in this job is supposed to know everything. And the problem is that we don't know enough about the virus, let alone how everything else is going to shake out. And you know something, Janice, I really appreciate you saying that. And sometimes it's okay to say, I don't know. But as soon as I have that information, I'll get it to you. Because right now we don't know. And I think maybe, I hope, that if you can say, I don't know, there is some relief in that. I know there's also guilt in it because we want to know everything. We want to provide all the answers. And we don't have all the answers because nobody has all the answers right now. And it's really important, Janice, to take care of yourself in this, because I get it about multitasking. I get it about wanting to have all the answers and taking care of everything, but you don't want to get sick in the process, and you need to take care of yourself in order to help other people take care of themselves. And you're a role model about taking care of yourself. And I believe that if people see leaders taking care of themselves, they may do a better job of doing that for themselves. I hope that helps. Anybody else, Blake?
I do not have anyone else.
Okay, so let's move on. Thank you so much, Michelle and Janice, for sharing. It's not easy to share. So as you've been going through the crisis, how have you managed your fears, being overwhelmed, not having all of the answers? We just talked about that, Janice. But I'd love to know how you manage that when you don't have the answers, Janice. And the next thing that you didn't expect, how are you managing that? I'll tell you that when the rape happened, I didn't manage this well. I was overwhelmed. The owners of the facility didn't want to talk with the media, so they said that was my job. And I had never done anything. I was 35 years old. I had never done anything like this before. I felt very overwhelmed. I was told that I could only read a 2-line press statement. So when I had at a table lots of media yelling questions at me, I couldn't say anything. And I felt like I looked stupid and that I wasn't smart, and that I didn't have all of the answers, or I knew things that I couldn't share. And there was always the next thing that I didn't expect, because we had media that were chasing us all the time. A local reporter who wanted to find all the dirt. So she did some pretty, unfortunately, underhanded things to get the dirt. And it wasn't dirt. It was simply about us being a facility that was struggling through a crisis. But you know, we're not perfect. And I guess that's the other thing I want to say to you is we're not perfect. As providers, we do the very best we can, but we're not perfect. So what about you? How have you managed through the crisis? Like anybody?
I do not have anyone right now.
Janice, if you wouldn't mind sharing again, I hate putting you on the spot, but you just talked about when you don't have the answers. So how do you cope with that? And you know what? I also want to say here that I hope we are among a group of colleagues that respects, I'm sure we are, what everyone is saying here. There's no wrong answer here. There's simply just the way to manage. So, and we did this with another association a couple of weeks ago, and it was kind of nice to see people on the phone supporting each other. That's what this is about. It's about supporting us in our industry. So if someone would be willing to talk about this, that would be really good to hear.
So Janice said that she just tries to communicate with the staff even when she does not have the answers. We also send out newsletters to families weekly with Q&A to try to anticipate questions.
That's good. You know, we're going to be doing another session about planning for crisis, and it's called Being Nimble, and that's it. Like anticipating what someone may be looking for from you and being able to address that so that you're trying to quell the waters a little bit. And that's a really hard thing to do, because how can we anticipate what's happening with this? So that's very important. Nice. Janice, thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it. Okay, so some thoughts about navigating through crisis. You can become part of the chaos. We have a client who was in one of the national papers, and his story was presented in an unfavorable way, and that became chaos for him, right? He's trying to manage tens of deaths in his facility and sick staff, and now he's being picked apart, and you can become part of the crisis in this scenario. So being fully present in the moment, we can go forward and think about a million things that we should be doing, but in the moment is so important, because then we deal with what's in the moment, we stay in the moment, and we have to, it's almost like compartmentalizing, shutting down all of the other things and being fully present with what's happening in this moment in time, even if it's 5 things that are happening in this moment in time, because if we add in more things, it only clouds our vision of what we can do to make this be better. And take control of your emotions. During my situation, I would go in my office and cry. And because I knew that I couldn't cry out there with the staff. So I had to find a place where I could protect myself, and if when I was overflowing with emotion, deal with it. And that's what I did. I walked into my office. There was a day when an article came out, and a 2-day expose came out in the paper called Clouds Over Westfall. And there was a whole column and a half about all the bad secret things about me. And I remember talking to my father on the phone, and he said, you have to go to work. You have to walk into work, head held high, and do what you got to do. So I walked in the office, I walked in the building, and I thought, I just have to get from the front door to my office, and all my department directors were standing out in the hallway in front of their offices watching me. And I said, get back to work. It doesn't matter what's happening out there. All that I care about is what's happening in here, period, end of story. And I got to my office almost and dealt with my emotions. But being present and out there handling your emotions is a very important thing. Focus on your energy, focus your energy and your actions. Think about who you want to be, even in crisis, who you want to be, how you're going to be that person. Even if you take 5 seconds, go into your office, 3 deep breaths, and think about where you want to expend your energy and your actions, and reflect. Easy for me to say, to reflect during this. But so many times, if we become part of the chaos, and I did, there were times I became part of the chaos, being able to reflect about what I was doing and step back and reset myself was critically important. And help someone else. I'd go up on the floors, talk to the staff, wash the floors. I would do anything I could to help my staff, because that, and I'm sure you're doing the same thing, because that took my mind off of other things that needed time for those things to process. And learn to say no and to say yes. So, hang on 1 second. It's very important to be able to say both things. Just give me a minute here. We as caregivers tend to say yes to lots of things, and we tend to say no more because we don't want to, we're uncomfortable, we don't want to disappoint, but saying no is very important. Setting a boundary for yourself, very important. And I'm not talking about the things that are your responsibilities, but I am talking about certain things that don't make a lot of sense. I wish that I had been able to say to the powers that be, I have a 5-week-old premature baby, and he needs to be with me at the facility if you want me to be here, so you have to hire someone to take care of him. I should have said no. I'm glad I stayed and went through the whole thing. It was important, but I sidestepped my family as a result of it, and 2 little children. So learn to say no and to say yes. And de-stress to avoid disease. The fact is, we will get sick, and we know administrators and staff, and I'm sure you know the same, that have gotten sick. Maybe they would have gotten sick anyway, but they're so stressed that they get sick. So this whole idea of de-stressing is very important, finding ways to do that. And again, we're in a crisis, it's so difficult, but it's very important to take those few moments to de-stress yourself. And check in with yourself. What am I doing? How am I doing it? What do I need to be doing the same? What do I need to be doing differently? Checking in with yourself is so important. And getting accurate information. We can certainly say that the information out there, I'm sure you've been on your what we call Department of Health calls and CMS calls and CDC calls, and the information is all different. And so trying to get accurate information to guide through this is so, so difficult. And the more you can drill down to get that information in different kinds of ways. We know an administrator who has a she has a way of looking forward onto the horizon of what's to come. And she actually, what she calls the bunker, has a closet next to her office that has 90 days worth of supplies, if you can believe it, because she was able to find ways, crazy ways, and we can talk about that more if you want, to get information so that as much as, and it's also with a disease like this, it's in the moment information. Things change all the time. So as much as you possibly can, getting that right information, and take a pause and use common sense. I don't know about facilities in Michigan. We found here in New York that people have been nervous to cohort residents. They were nervous early on to do that, and because they weren't being able to meet the requirements of the regulation in terms of moving people out of rooms. And that ended up being an issue. So common sense would say that if someone has the disease, then you move them onto a quarantine unit, or you change people's rooms so that you're cohorting people together. This is just an example, and I'm sure many of you did this. But this idea of common sense versus the regulation, sometimes in a situation like this, they don't align. And it's very important to do the right thing, even if it doesn't meet the regulatory requirements, because one way or the other, we're getting dinged if we do, we're getting dinged if we don't. So doing the right thing, of course, is the best thing. And listen actively, listen with all of your senses. Hear what the staff is saying, the families are saying. The more that we can help people be calmer, as calm as we can make them, the better that is. Ellen, do you want to mention what you've been doing with a facility in terms of writing Facebook posts? Because that's a really wonderful thing you've been doing.
Yeah, we in the facility that I'm working with, we're trying to honor each of the departments and to let people know what those departments are doing. So I've been posting for the facility once a week, and we've been highlighting the nurses, the housekeepers, the dietary staff. And one of the things we've been trying to do in each of the posts is to say, yes, these people come, they take care of your elders, and then they go home and take care of their own families. Very important to help people out there understand that you are us and we are you. And there's not that kind of dividing point. I've been really thrilled with the responses on Facebook. We're always nervous, because you never know when you put things out. But we have gotten such wonderful responses from our families, and that's really been positive. The other thing I just want to throw in at this point is for us all to remember why we went into these jobs. We went into them because of our values. And sometimes in a crisis, I have to think back and go, okay, where am I grounded in my values as I move forward? And I think that for me has always been helpful. So that combining with focusing on some of the good, the positive, I think has been a good strategy.
Thank you. And last, avoid rework by doing homework. The more we know, the more we're not doing the same thing over and over again. Again, we're living in a time with very few answers and lots more questions. But the more we can find ways to understand as much as we can, the better this all goes. So just some thoughts about navigating through crisis. Blake, anybody want to say anything at this point?
We do not have anything else.
Okay, thanks. Okay, some other strategies to think about. Be a long distance runner. This is not like an emergency in your facility where it may be that a pipe broke or the air conditioning isn't working. If you have air conditioning, this is something of a marathon that's going to go on for a while. As leaders, I think we tend to feel that we know how to deal with a crisis in the moment, but something over the long haul is a much different kind of situation. So the more we can run like this is a marathon and think about the running and how we're breathing and how we're pacing ourselves through the long distance run is going to be very important, particularly if this shows up again in the fall. And forget any assumptions you may have about how things should work. And don't we do this? I mean, I think we do this in our jobs. We have assumptions, and a lot of that comes from the regulation, but how we need to do the work, how we need to do the job. But this is something that's so completely different that it's about stepping away and rethinking all of those ways that we normally do things, because it's a completely different ball game. So forgetting about the assumptions and starting again is going to be very important. And still know that anything is possible. Some days I'm sure it does not feel like there's hope, but the reality is that there is hope. What Ellen and I are working on right now is a way to, this has brought so much attention to nursing homes that, as awful as it has been, there is also an opportunity to look at change in a way that benefits our industry. So with all the death, I don't even want to call it a silver lining, but there is an opportunity, and we're taking advantage of the opportunity and meeting with several people to start talking about how do we make change now so that we're reimbursed better, so that we have enough staff to take care of people and we can pay them appropriately. All of those things, the regulatory requirements and what's reasonable and what's not, all of the things that we're thinking about now for change. And practice improvisation. I am sure all of you have had to improvise during this time. Practice how to do it. Get comfortable improvising. You know, like this woman who has this closet, she went to hardware stores. She's using lab coats as gowns for staff. Anything that she could do, she improvised with. She went on. I suspect that she started her career and worked her way up through the organization to become an administrator. She worked on one of the units one night and discovered by working as a CNA that she didn't have some of the equipment she needed there, and she improvised to make that work and got more things for the staff that they needed. So the more we can improvise, the better it is. Set a general direction and intent for the future. We don't know how this is going to end up, but we do know that things have changed. So what does that look like as we move forward into the future? Because that's going to be very important. Reconnect, and Ellen said this, reconnecting with your values, your ideas, personally and professionally. Who do you want to be? What do you want to do? I ask my kids that all the time when they're struggling through. I have a 28-year-old and a 24-year-old, and I ask them, who do you want to be and what do you want to do? When I see that they're waffling a little bit, because reconnecting with those ideas about ourselves is critically important so that we don't lose ourselves in this process. So just some things to think about. Okay, our next question to you. What was out of your control? So what
Right.
we've heard. Oh,
I was gonna say, it looks like, oh no, never mind. I'm sorry. You can.
that's okay. We've heard from people that some of their residents were dying so quickly and they had no way to control it, no way to stop it before it happened. Because from what we've heard, this comes on very rapidly for many of our residents, and within 3 hours, we heard this about the facility in Kirkland, within 3 hours, a resident that seemed relatively okay was crashing. Out of your control. The fact that families can't be with their loved ones during this, there are pros and cons to that, right? We don't want to bring people in and expose our residents further. And at the same time, we had someone say to us that she thought she was going to lose residents because of failure to thrive, because they were so isolated. It was out of her control, out of her facility's control. They couldn't stop that. Anything that was out of your control.
Someone says that their staff is getting sick, but not COVID-19.
What kind of sick? Who said that?
His name is William.
Thank you, William, for sharing that. Sick because they're so worn out.
And if you'd like to, Will, you can type in the chat if you'd like to talk at all, and just say you can unmute me or something like that, and we can do that. If not, you can feel free to respond here, and I can read that out for you as well.
So what kind of sick, William?
He said sick just from like normal spring ailments. So
Okay. Yeah, and then you don't have enough staff to take care of things. Are you already running short of staff? I'm sure everyone's running short of staff, but because of COVID, did you have staff impacted by COVID, Will?
he says no.
Okay. All right, thank you so much for sharing that. Anybody else? What was out of your control? What was out of your control? Ellen, anything here you want to share about what you've heard was out of people's control?
1 second. I need to unmute Ellen. Okay, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the things that I've heard people really talk about was the contradictory information that they kept receiving. So I get a number of emails, and every time I looked at them, there was information from CDC, there was information from the governor, there was information from the Department of Health. And I thought, my God, to try and put all of that together and figure out the correct strategy is a huge challenge. So the administrators that I've worked with, they did their best to say, okay, how am I going to respond to this, and how am I going to make the best decisions? But this whole sense of not having good guidance and good guidelines has been an extreme challenge, certainly here in New York, and I don't know how it is out in Michigan.
How is it in Michigan? Anyone want to share that? Okay, I'll tell you what, we'll come back to this. If you want to share kind of how that experience has been with the CDC, with your department. Oh, go ahead.
Somebody said in independent living following Michigan's executive orders versus orders lifting the stay-at-home order, and how it applies to our residents to keep them safe and communication with families that we still are not allowing visitors.
Oh, that's difficult, because people think if the stay-at-home order is lifted, then that means that it's okay for you too. That's very, very difficult. Do families, who said that, Blake?
That was Michelle.
Oh, yeah, Michelle. Michelle, so what do you say to families when that happens? When that happened, how do you explain that to families?
She says we are now allowing outdoor visits.
Oh, nice. What a great strategy, Michelle. So smart. You know, this is the whole idea of being nimble and pivoting, and all of this is coming up with ways for people to thrive while we're still in a certain amount of isolation. Thank you. Okay, so describe some of your coping mechanisms and now how you have taken care of yourself. I know it's really hard to talk about yourself in this way. I just want to say it's not easy to share that. It makes us feel vulnerable. It makes us uncomfortable. We've had people, I had one woman in another state we've done this with that said, I go down to the activities room and we have 2 dogs, and I sit and I pet the dogs and stay with them until I feel like I have myself more in control. That's a very personal thing to share. And some people might think, you know, as an adult administrator, you should just have yourself pulled together. I hope we don't think that, because the reality is that in something like this, there is a time that we may all fall apart. So knowing how you cope helps other people on this webinar get an idea that maybe they hadn't tried. And I'd love to hear your ideas of how you coped.
Someone said pampering, or it was William again, I'm sorry. Pampering the staff snacks on hand providing lunch for all 3 times a week.
Nice. So smart, Will. Pampering the staff. We're grateful to them. We all are, and we know that. Thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you for doing that for them. I'm sure they really were grateful and appreciated your caring. Anybody else? Will, this is a hard question, but how do you take care of yourself? I really appreciate what you shared about the staff. How do you take care of yourself? Now I'm putting you on the spot. And feel free to put me on the spot. Okay. If you feel like sharing that at some point, I'd love to hear.
It looks
Okay.
like someone actually. Oh, see, these are just popping up at random. Never mind. I'm sorry. You're okay. Someone or William just said again. Making sure to get enough sleep each night.
Good. I'm sure things keep you up at night. So it's critically important. Good. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Some other strategies to think about when managing through a crisis. Don't react or respond to the crisis. We do that, right? We think, my God, we have all of this in our facilities. What are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? And it can make us be so crazy, feels so at a loss to know what to do. But focusing on the next thing and the next thing is critical. If we can stay in the moment, like we talked about earlier, and focus on each thing in front of us, I'm sure you already know this. Just a reminder, focusing on the next thing and the next thing in front of you, really critical so that we don't react and then respond to the crisis in a way that we don't want to. So that whole idea of stepping back and being reflective, even if it's for 5 seconds, taking 3 deep breaths, really important. And think creatively, and you may be thinking to yourself, how the hell am I going to think creatively during something like this? And that's true. It's tough. But I will tell you, again, a very different kind of crisis than what you're going through. I started to ask myself that question during the months of the rape, because there were things that kept happening, because the media kept digging and looking for things, and things that would be considered normal and not normal, but within the norm of things that happen in our facilities were picked up by the media and then reported as special reports on the TV. I'd walk down the hall and see a special report popping up on all of my residents' television sets. And I decided that I had to think creatively. The staff was telling me that they were embarrassed to tell people where they worked. And so we bought them t-shirts that said, I work at Westfall, any questions? So, and I gave a t-shirt to every staff member, and I said, when you go to the grocery store, you're making a statement. And people will be less likely to ask you the question, and it empowered the staff to feel more in control of what was happening to them because they felt so embarrassed. The other thing we did was I had 21 leaders, and when department directors, and when no one could handle it anymore, I called, if any of you have ever read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, I called the Covey Institute and I said, we need a trainer to come and work with the leadership staff for 2.5 days because they are done, they are wiped out, and they need help. They need someone other than me thinking of things to do for them, with them, being with them. We need someone from the outside to come in and work with us. And it made a huge difference. At the end of the 2.5 days, he said that he had never met such an extraordinary staff, said that to my staff. And it made them feel so good about what they were doing. He said, given what you've been through, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate what you were doing. So anything we can think of creatively to support the staff, to support ourselves, very important. Draw outside the lines, going back to cohorting residents or getting PPE from crazy places or thinking outside the box. Don't love the expression, but the idea of coloring outside the lines, the regulation doesn't really, if you're a skilled nursing facility, if you're assisted living, even in independent living, there are rules that we have to follow. And sometimes those rules don't coincide with what's in front of us. So drawing outside the lines, thinking outside the box is really important in order to come up with a new idea that may make things better. And keep communicating. I know you're doing this. Keep talking to the staff, keep talking to the families, keep talking to anyone who asks you questions. Keep communicating, because sometimes we want to protect people, right? As leaders, we want to protect people, we want to protect the staff and the families and the residents. But right now, the more we have to tell, the better it is, because it's going to be critical. I think facilities run into trouble when they don't communicate. So even if you don't have the answers, like we talked about earlier, the more we can say what we do know, the better that goes.
So Lori says, I find it hard to have the correct response when someone says people die. It's part of the job. I know this, but it is not helpful when someone with whom we have developed a relationship. Any thoughts?
Who's saying, someone that's saying that to you, someone says that to you, and is that a staff member? Is that a family member? I'm assuming that's a staff member?
Supervisor.
I'm a big believer in question asking. So I wonder, Lori, if you could say, I'm just wondering why you say that. You'd have to find an approach that works. You know, it's intimidating to say these things to supervisors, but right now we're all human beings. And so I think asking the question about why she says it in that way is important. The other thing maybe to say is that as you're working with the staff, if she says, you know, everybody dies, so kind of what's the big deal? To be able to go back and say, you know, the staff is struggling through this because it's not necessarily one death, so you're also being an educator now. It's not just one death, it's many deaths. And it's the anticipation of more death. And so the staff is really struggling, and I wonder if you might help me come up with a strategy to work through that, because now you're embracing her and you're asking her to help come up with a strategy. She may not understand what this is, and she may be afraid of the whole thing, and that's her response because she doesn't want to be too close to it. Is that helpful at all?
She says, thank you, makes perfect sense.
Okay, I'm glad. All right. Do not let negativity blur your direction, your dedication, your determination. You know, it's easy, like the story you just told, Lori, it's easy to buy into another perspective that somebody has, and that negativity can drag us down. It's really important to stay in your way of thinking, your direction, your dedication, your determination, and be comfortable in that place. And ask for and allow help, guidance, and suggestions from everyone. We know so much staff, I know you do too, that have great ideas. The frontline staffs have had to do workarounds for years and years. They know so much, and I know you know that. And so guidance and suggestions when we're going through all of this. Some people, there's this guy named Ray. I love Ray. He's a housekeeper in a facility that I do work for. And Ray has some of the best ideas, and I always go to him. And then I always encourage him to take other staff to the administrator and talk about his ideas, because they are smart ideas and they make sense. So you know this. All right. So holding the ladder of support, let's talk about the staff.
Hey, Claudia.
Yep,
So Michelle says, it's sad that our elders have lived such a full life, and to lose them to the virus is very sad. It's different than passing away from old age.
Right. That's really, really true, Michelle. I think we're all, when we see this happen, we're so heartbroken. And I really appreciate you saying it. It breaks our hearts because we can't stop it. I mean, you're right. There's a big difference. And you know what, Michelle, that's a great question. That's a great answer for Lori, if that's what you meant it to be. So maybe that's another thing to say to your supervisor, Lori, just what Michelle said, that it's so sad to see our elders dying from COVID. It's one thing to lose them because of a chronic illness or because they're just aged. It's another thing to lose them over this. That's great, Michelle. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it is tragically sad. So here we are, we're the ones that need to be holding the ladder of support for our staffs right now, right? To make sure that the ladder doesn't get wobbly and they fall off of it. So what's it been like for your staff? Some of you have said a few things, but talk a little bit more about what it's been like for your staff. Michelle, Lori, Will, Janice, any of you guys, how's it been like for your staffs?
Well, Michelle says that their staff are very dedicated, and then Lori says they are feeling overwhelmed like everyone, but we are supportive of each other.
Nice. See, that's exactly it, right, Lori? And Michelle, thank you. I know how dedicated your staffs are, and thank you for sharing that. And Lori, it is overwhelming, and this is exactly the place we are in right now, right? Helping one another. The fact is that it's not the hierarchical model of supervisors and staff right now. It's people that are struggling through a terribly difficult time. And how do we manage that grief together, feeling overwhelmed together? Because if you have a team that supports one another, it's going to make it easier, doesn't seem like the right word, but less challenging to go through this. Thank you for sharing that. How have you helped them to manage their fears, their focus, their motivation? Will, you said something about pampering them. Perfect. What else have you all done?
I was going to say, Will actually just said something else. He said, with sharing all that we can to keep them informed seems to have lowered the stress.
Oh, nice. I had an administrator tell me that 86% of, and I've read this actually, we'll look at that in a minute, but 86% of the time, he said to me, the rumors and the gossip is what he was dealing with, which was making things worse. And so the more we communicate, to your point, Will, the less stress there is, because then they have definitives. We can't give them all the definitives, but then they have more information and they don't have to make up their own stories. So that's perfect. Anybody else?
Nope.
Okay. And how do you hear and respond to their vulnerability? So Lori, you said you support one another, they feel overwhelmed when they're feeling vulnerable. And I'm just looking at my notes really quick here. When they're feeling vulnerable, how do you help them get through that? One of the things I started doing with one of the facilities we work with is I started sending daily messages and to the director of education, and he started posting them throughout the facility. And it really dealt with, what do you do when it gets hard and when change happens and when people are talking against our industry? And every day there was a daily message, a little something that I wrote, a quote and then a picture that coordinated with that. And they post it every day now. And that was a way to try to help staff feel better about where they are. Any other of you?
So Lori says, we discussed that there are no answers because this is all new territory. It is okay. It is okay not to be okay and not to have all the answers. Validation is essential.
Perfect. Lori, perfect. Yes, they need to be validated in a way that maybe we don't normally do, or maybe we do, but right now, critical that you're validating. That's perfect. Thank you. Anybody else?
Not at the moment.
Okay. So we know you did some really good things to get staff through this. We would love it if you would share some of those things that you did. How were you resourceful? Some of the techniques you used. Will, you mentioned pampering the staff with food, which is spectacular. Anybody else? Okay, if you come up with anything else you'd like to share, please feel free to do that. We'd love to hear it. So engaging the staff so that they know you're with them. And I'm sure you do this already. These are just some reminders. And this really focuses on the best ways to downsize fear and upsize cohesiveness during a crisis. So being present for them, we've talked about. We had a facility say to us, can you help us figure out how to increase focus and motivation? So Ellen came up with this great statement, and we used it with this facility. If I had a magic wand, I would make all of this disappear. What are the things that I can do to make it easier for you? That first statement hopefully acknowledges their fear and has them know, like you've been talking about, that you understand what they're going through. The second statement has them feel, it empowers them to think about practical ways that you can help them. So the more, like the woman I talked to you about who worked the night shift and saw the specific thing that happened was that she was working on their quarantined unit, and she saw that anytime the staff would have to come out of the room, they'd have to take off their gloves, and there was no place to throw them, and there was not, they'd have to go all the way down to the garbage room, and then they'd have to get a new pair of gloves. And she said this was a situation where they could be using the same gloves from room to room because the access wasn't there. So on Monday morning, she went out and bought tray tables and hand sanitizer and gloves and waste baskets for every single quarantine room, so that staff, it was a little thing, but it was a big thing, right? And she saw this and she dealt with it, and staff were so grateful that she saw it. So the more we can get that feedback from staff about what they need from us, the better that goes. So our ladder, holding the ladder for our staffs, these are the ways we can support. Some examples. So we can be creative. And an example of that is a quiet room for staff to take a time out to breathe for 5 minutes. And maybe some of you have done this, but this idea of giving them a space so they have a space to go, really important. Walking the building frequently so staff see that you are with them. I'm sure you all do that. Communicate often, share as much information as possible. Will, you've talked about that. It's really, really important. Giving, in terms of the factual piece of this, dispelling myths and gossip like we talked about. You are the point person who provides accurate information. Acknowledging staff individually and often. Prior to this, I did some work in a facility and I watched the administrator. It took me on an 1.5-hour tour of the facility. He knew every single staff member, as I'm sure you do, and he had something to say to every person, like, your birthday was last night, how did that go? Did you have a nice time celebrating it? Anything we can do to individually acknowledge a staff member. and listen and hear what is happening home for staff. And I think, Michelle, you made this comment earlier, Michelle or Lori, that the more we know about what's happening at home for them, the better that is, because then we can offer some thoughts to them about ways they might be able to, ways we can help them. This woman who had the bunker closet had a staff member come to her and say, my mother has cancer, I'm taking care of her, and I don't have supplies at home. So she went into the bunker and she gave the staff members some supplies, anything we can do to help. And make sure department directors are holding the ladder with you. You are not alone in this. And so I'm sure your leaders are doing this with you. Everyone's holding the ladder together. Okay, so being nimble and exploring approaches to crisis obstacles. Because this is a long-term care crisis that we are facing, being nimble will be critical because everything continues to change so rapidly. That's hard for us in long-term care. We're not used to things changing like this all the time and not having all the answers we need to have all the time. Decision-making is typically long-term and based on regulatory requirements and financial well-being. So how are we nimble in this situation? Learn to pivot early. We read about this early on. We were talking about, Ellen and I, about pivoting early, and then we saw someone with an article out there talking about pivoting early. Pivoting early, though, means not being afraid to take risks, because the reality is that to come up with the right answer in the moment, we may have to make a move that isn't comfortable and takes us someplace that makes us very uncomfortable and could be a risk to what we're used to, but the right answer. And don't be trapped by old and misconceived beliefs. There's a lot of that in our industry. And the more that we can be pivoting and it's so hard to get rid of old habits and old beliefs. And by the way, if you want to say anything through this, just let Blake know and he'll let me know. It's so hard to move away from what we're used to, but what we're used to may not be what's the right answer anymore. And remember that solutions often lie with the people who do the hands-on work. Again, the example of Ray, and we have a million examples, and I'm sure you do too, of people that have ideas that a lot of times we may or may not consider for a variety of reasons, but everyone's got ideas now. The more that we can tap into everyone's ideas, the better it goes. So again, being nimble. One of the things we're recommending is to create a solutions team, a crisis solutions team. So we're still working through ourselves. What are the characteristics of people that should be on that team? The purpose of the team is to really handle the crisis and how it is particular to your organization. Many organizations are dealing with lots of death, but there are facilities that are not dealing with lots of death, but may have other issues. Because I've heard this in some of the rural facilities in New York, they have either no cases or a few cases, so they're dealing with the rules that have been put in place by the governor, but they're in a situation where they're losing staff because they can't function in some of those rules. So every organization has different issues. So the team's focus is on the role of the crisis for your particular organization. They gather facts, they understand the emotional impact on the organization, they get to the root cause of the organization's challenges, and they strategize and recommend solutions. So the more we can put people in place to help us as the leader figure out how to come up with solutions, and we may be a part of this team as well. Every organization is different. So that's part of being nimble, having a team that can move. And one of the most important things about being nimble and a crisis solutions team is being able to respond rapidly, well thought out, rapidly. And that's hard to put together because so many times we want to think things through. We've been taught to think things through and make sure we've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's, but the reality is that we may not be able to do all of that, but we do have to have a thought process a nimble thought process, and then a nimble way of putting a solution into place. And I'm sure you all have had to do that during this time. Fear paralyzes teams. So the more we can look at how the fear is hampering our ability to be a team and address that, the more we downsize some of the issues that are causing us problems. Rumors destroy confidence. This 86% of gossip is related to what the obstacles are that we as organizations face during a crisis. And as you've already talked about, providing accurate factual information. This is so hard, but it's really important. Show courage and stay positive. I'd come home at night and cry. Yeah, I'm a big crier. I didn't cry in front of the staff. And I pulled myself together and I stayed positive. I always came up with the next thing we could do that was a positive thing. On Valentine's Day, I brought candy to every single shift, every single department. Maybe it was a little thing, but they saw me, they knew I cared, and that I was thinking about them while they were working. Show courage, stay positive, and keep thinking about some of the things that you can do that will make it be more positive.
This is Ellen. Can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
I was thinking about this providing accurate factual information. One of the things certainly that is operating in New York is that our staff, particularly our line staff, come from many different cultures, speak many different languages, and I, as an administrator, have always had to learn to craft my message in a way that different kinds of staff can hear it. And the rumors are different depending upon culture, depending upon orientation. So I think it's really important at this point to really make sure that you're speaking the language, both the real language, having somebody translate, but also the emotional language that people can understand this factual information.
Thank you. It's such, I won't belabor it. It's such a great point, Ellen. Thank you so much for that. You can't take ownership of COVID. There's nothing you could have done to have prevented it. But along the way, something didn't go well. And it was something you tried that didn't go well. When we take responsibility for something we've done wrong, mostly people appreciate that. The more we can think about what that is, and also then we're looking at what would we try differently. I was recently talking to someone who I know who's depressed, and I said to her, you know, I was depressed. I not in the same way that you have been, but one of the things I learned was I had to take baby steps. I had to take a step. Whatever the step was, I had to take a step. And so I think about that here. We have to take a step. Even if the step doesn't end up being the right step, it's an exploration and we're trying things in an environment that we don't understand. So each step we take, right or wrong, an important step to take. And be present. We've talked about that. And stay focused. And take a break if you're unfocused, and so that you can get back on track. And continue to evaluate the function, process, and outcomes of the solutions team in a constructive way. Are they doing what you're hoping that they're doing? Are they giving you answers, you know, within a day, within 2 days to solve an issue, within a matter of a few hours in some cases? And how are they working together? And this also requires that you set some parameters for them. So we'll be talking about that at a later time in another session that we're doing, but this constructive exploring approach without a 2x4, really constructively looking at the team to see how they're doing. And keep firefighting out of the process. I used to work for a guy who loved to firefight. He loved to put out fires. He wasn't a process guy. He was a wait till the 11th hour guy and then use a fire extinguisher on everything. And firefighting, we all know, doesn't really work all that well. And in a crisis, it's it's exponentially bad because there's not enough water to put out all of the fires. So the more we can have a process to our thinking, again, staying nimble, the more we're going to keep firefighting out of the process. Refresh your goals when the crisis is over. This crisis may change the very nature of our mission and our goals as an organization, because it's something that has impacted us in a way that will have us reevaluating how we move forward as an organization. I mean, who would have thought, for those of you that are nursing home administrators, that having to put in our emergency preparedness an infectious disease of this kind of magnitude? We wouldn't have ever believed, maybe in some ways. There are some people that did, but I'm not so sure we would have ever believed that this could possibly happen. So we would have never even thought to put it into a plan of action. So now all of a sudden now we're having to, jockey all of the time to manage this. So what do the goals of your organization look like? What are they going to look like when this is over? And it may not be over for a bit of time. So to this point, does anyone want to share any thoughts? Anything about what you've experienced, what you're thinking about, what we're talking about? We'd love to hear any thoughts you have. Okay. The day after everything goes back to normal, what would be on your wish list? We'd love you to tell us your dream wish list, like the thing, enough money to pay everybody twice what they're making right now. And your practical wish list, I need to be sure I've got enough supplies. What would be on your wish list? Blake, anybody?
I
This
do
is
not.
Ellen.
Oh, you can go ahead.
Oh,
Ellen.
Ellen, yeah.
What's on my wish list is that my dream wish list is that this pandemic that we have been through opens a conversation, a rich conversation about how we care for elders, what our nursing homes look like. Are we going to invest our resources in caring for this very vulnerable population? I wish that people could understand what it's like to be an administrator of a facility. I would like people to understand that our aides, our housekeepers, our dietary people deserve such more of a living wage, and that caregiving become acknowledged as a important, professional, value-laden job, and so that people that are doing the work that you are doing there in Michigan are acknowledged. That's my dream, and I know it's a dream, but that's what I would like to see happen.
Thank you. Anybody else? What would be on your dream wish list or your practical wish list?
So Michelle says on her wish list, the greater community would understand the needs of our elders and what we as housing providers do for those elders, and great financial support and greater financial support.
Thank you for that. Absolutely. That's a great dream. Anybody else?
Nope, I do not have anyone else.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Our wish list for you, public acknowledgement of your work in heroics. We post things on Facebook, on all social media. We keep making sure from our organization that people are being honored, thought about, talked about, seen in a different light. We're talking to some of our representatives about that. Public acknowledgement of your work in heroics. It's critical because as an industry, we get dumped on all the time, and it's enough. Revamping the reputation of nursing homes. This has come, as many of you know, as a result of that people don't want to deal with elders to begin with in our society. That nursing homes were developed under the medical model, and there was never the social piece until OBRA came out in '87, for those of you who have been around way back then. And even then, we looked more at the clinical than we did at the social. We looked more at how we looked like a hospital rather than as a home. And so getting people to understand what it's like to work in a facility, to live in a facility, as we talked about earlier, the function of a facility, which is different than what people understand, because people don't want to talk about it. And we need to start talking about it and having a voice. Educating the public about the good work that nursing homes do. You know, it's always about the nursing home that does the bad job and never about the nursing home that did the good job. And right now, it's every nursing home that's doing a bad job. So we need to educate people about nursing homes, and that's part of what we're doing. And providing families with factual information about the issues that long-term care faces. It becomes a blame the facility issue, as opposed to having families really truly understand, what does the reimbursement look like? Why is it that a staff member has to work 3 jobs because they don't make enough money? Why don't they make enough money? And the regulation that we need to abide by for those of us that are regulatory bodies. And again, the rules, if we're not, educating families about what that looks like. And Lori or Michelle, one of you said, I think Michelle, maybe it was you, how you need to talk with your families about why they still can't come and see you. The more education we can provide to our families, the better that's going to go. We just did this with a facility that was losing money. And I said, I think the staff need to, because they were very upset with leadership and wanted to make more money. And I said, I think we need to have a session where we're educating staff about why you're losing money. And the administrator went along with me. And I started to go through how financial loss was happening in their facility. And I said, and what can you do to upsize the income and downsize expense? And they came up with ideas. And one of the things I said was, you'll have to take some heavier care residents, but you'll need to be trained. And half the staff said, we are already trained. We do this in other facilities. And so this idea of doing the same thing with families, where we're educating them, the more they understand about the struggles, the more hopefully they become advocates for us and with us. So those are our wishes for you. So again, we want to thank you. We're so grateful for everything that you're doing, and to you. So I thank you for yesterday and thank you for today, but most of all, thank you for the days to come. We are so grateful to all of you. Thank you for your time today. We'd love to hear more from you if you'd like to share anything privately with us, and have a very fine rest of your day. Thanks so much.
All right. I just wanted to finish things off with, obviously, if you do have any further questions for Claudia, you can go ahead and feel free to reach out to us. You can either email info@leadingagemi.org, or you can go ahead and email myself, Blake, B-L-A-K-E, @leadingagemi.org, and I can try to send you over Claudia's emails or get you into contact with her. And then obviously, lastly, we would just like to thank Claudia very much for presenting today. I think a lot of this information was very helpful for a lot of people here. We would also like to thank, I think that we are up near the 30s for our members and participants today that took out time out of their busy schedules to join us for today's webinar. So just like Claudia said, we appreciate everything that you guys do each and every day to support your staff and provide quality care to your residents. We are grateful for your continued support, and we are here for you when you need our assistance and resources. And then just a quick reminder that we do have another Safe and Calm COVID-19 webinar tomorrow with Deanna Mitchell. That will be beginning at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you already registered for that, you will receive a notification. It should be an hour before it begins tomorrow, and you can go ahead and join that. Other than that, thank you again, Claudia, and everyone have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.